Thanks, and good evening. I think Kaumbi has done it all. For those of you who have had exposure to the book, you have seen it, what is covered. There are various issues. Of course, it starts from his childhood to his departure, which is the recall by the ancestors. But there were chapters to me that were so interesting that I focused on. I mainly focused on, I read the others, but I focused on two chapters to a very large extent. I looked at the one particularly on the political involvement, and the other one was on back to the roots. And I was being deliberate. I was being deliberate in doing that. I was trying to understand who this Rukoro is. That is what I was trying to understand. And this book, to me, at least opened up some of those questions that I had. I was in the more or less the same time, in as much as he was some years older than me, like what Kaumbi indicated. But it was the 70s, of course. That was Rukoro's time. And there was a time when a lot of things were happening in the country. And we had issues around Swanu, we had issues around Swapo, people leaving the country, Angola getting independence, 74, 75. Then you had a group of people living through Angola that time when the Angolans were coming into Namibia. A lot of Namibians left through the north. So that was the time that Rukoro actually even completed his matric. And he landed into Swanu as publicity at one time, and then later on becoming the Secretary General. Now, going through this book, it was actually giving me the context of the kind of person that Rukoro came to be. Of course, he's a product of his social condition. He's a very, very product of his social condition. The 70s, of course, was a very difficult time in this country. He matriculated, and matric those days was like you have a degree. And of course, you were entitled to a job. He could not get a job. But when he could not get a job, Rukoro did not give up. He went on, he enrolled himself with Lawrence and Bones. That's a white company. And for a black kid in the 70s, apprenticeship training was not for blacks. Totally, it was not. It was only up to 1980, the first blacks to be sent for apprenticeship training in whatever field. Now, for Rukoro to have enrolled by that time with Lawrence Bones as an EP that time, that's the kind of character that I'm actually getting through the book. A person who will say, I am going to make it. Whatever come hell or high water, I am going to confront the system. And I think he did well. He had this passion for becoming a lawyer, and he kept it. It remained inside him. Because if you read the book, you will realize that he only left the country, I think, in the 80s to go to the UK. That's when he started his legal training. But what he went through in this country in the 70s, a lot of his friends, of course, were skipping the borders. There's mention of Benz, the man who has come to be known as Benz in the northern regions. He was actually trying to skip the country, and he ended up there. He became a businessman in the north. But Rukoro was still stuck here, and he was facing everything. One thing that I have come to read in this book was that he was at pains, I think, in so many times, looking at a lot of people that he mobilized, be it for SWAPO, those who joined SWAPO and those who joined SWAN, who left the country and never came back. And of course, he must have heard what happened to some of these people. There is a quote that he showed some remorse that some young people he mobilized to join the struggle did not return. But when you meet Rukoro, one would say, come on, it's like he doesn't care. But this is the kind of person that you see. That came through. He actually, he further opined that despite the harassment by the racist police, the youth had hope, and he was one of them those days. He had hope that Namibia one day would become independent. And that was actually the hope that they had was coming through the west of Namibia. And there's mention of people who were, those of us who were listening to radios those days. When you hear people like Sangamo, Shidera talking, the Jackson Kauyewa singing, Kaumo Shombe, Kauko Hengari, Sakina Mwongo, Charles Mubita, Sansindi, when you hear those guys talking, and some of them I met them in exile also. Now, when you hear some of these guys talking, that was the hope, keeping the flame alive for people like Rukoro. It's a young fellow those days. But we are talking of his evolution, becoming a politician, the politician that he became to be. What we are being told is that those students who were coming back from South Africa, the Namibians, the Charles, the Gashidekos, the Marco Hausiku, the Ephraim Kasutos, those people who came those days from South Africa. Of course, there was a spirit of black consciousness now hitting the ground in South Africa. Steve Biko was actually the person advocating for that. There was, of course, the old ideas of the Pan-Africanism by Sobukwe through the PAC. And of course, one other area that we are being told is that the Rivonia trial in itself was also one of those issues that formed his opinion and his outlook of life. At one time, he thought of himself, or even Swanu, to be more of a Pan-Africanist movement. But later on, he also found himself, going through meeting some of the young people that he met during the time. He also had the opportunity of meeting people like Sas Cooper, who was the Azanian People's Organization, AZAPO's president those days. They met in South Africa. Now, all these ideas, what we are getting is that you have a Pan-Africanist person here, you've got black consciousness being advocated by some of this group, but then the party that he was in was a party that was started by people like the Kolongwidi, Orwetoweni Kolongwidi. Now, Kolongwidi started a party in the 50s, and Kolongwidi, of course, is a product of Fort Hare. Now, you have a person coming from Fort Hare, of course, a member of the African National Congress. Unlike people who were in Cape Town, who were more to the unity movement. Now, that's the other reality that we're also getting through this book. Now, the interesting thing that I'm also seeing in the book is that the history of Rukoro in terms of political maturity, it was, of course, within SWAN. Therefore, the book could not have been otherwise, from my understanding. what they have written with regard to what happened within SWANU External Council, the SWANU old guards coming back to the country, the old guards causing problems within the party, or seemingly causing problems within the party because the youth had a totally different perception or views and expectations from these guys. All those issues were issues that were going around the kind of person that we've come to know as Vekuii Rukoro. Now, of course, Rukoro vacillated between the Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness movement. On the one hand, Rukoro also took keen interest in the Ovaherero brave history that was characterized by the bravery of people like Ahimemwa, the Mahareros, and the Hosea Kutapos. Now, of course, this is something that we are getting through the book. We are talking of his political evolution. And we are saying there are those ideologies that are prevailing in the 70s. There are people that he's meeting in the 70s. There were realities of the 70s in terms of the various court cases that were happening, the Ivorian trials and all that. But then he also, when he comes back, of course, when he's meeting his people, and I think that those are some of the issues that Kavari was referring to, where he was born, the history, the stories that he listened to during, around the fire, those stories made the kind of person that Rukoro is. And hence, of course, his interest in trying to find out what is so special about these Kahimemwas, the Hosea, and of course, Hosea by that time was still alive. And he only died in the 70s, but at least Rukoro was in. Of course, I'm aware of that, so Rukoro would have been better aware of Hosea's existence than me. Yeah, so that is those are some of the issues that I've actually picked up in the book. The other issue that I've also seen is the role in terms of consciousness that Hosea Kutapos also imbued with, or that Rukoro actually got from him, was that nationalistic tendency that Hosea also came up with, of not only advancing the Hereros, but he also had meetings. His meetings, the Jason Mutumbulwa, the Sam Nuyomas, were regular attendees of his council meetings. And that in itself also says something about the kind of person that Hosea was, and that a person that Rukoro also was looking up to. No wonder one Rukoro could be comfortable, be it among the youth or even among the old generation, and he could survive among them. Now, a lot of other things, of course, that come through is what was done, what has happened with regard to a lot of other people who had an impact on Rukoro as a person, particularly the times of Hosea and the experience that Swanu went through. Of course, Swanu was also a victim of circumstances. And this is the party that he was leading most of the time as a Secretary General to a very large extent. And Swanu, having been kicked out of the Afro-Asian People's Conference in Nicosia in Cyprus in 1968, so the Sino-Soviet, conflict, and of course the emphasis that was being put on the Soviet parties, or Soviet aligned parties, which in this time was, of course, SWAPO, and the extent to which Rukoro himself as a person persevered, despite all those setbacks within his own party, some of his comrades coming back to the country, remaining out there and sticking it out until that time when he felt that these guys came back to actually disrupt everything, and he opted to go back for his studies. He went to the UK to pick up his studies. But even while he was there, he came back to the whole idea of pursuing his political career, his political line, in terms of what he wanted to do. And of course, there was also another person that had an impact on Rukoro, and that was Ishevi Bey. Now, mind you, these are two people from Omaruru, but who were very, very strong in terms of their political outlook and resolute compared to so many others. This is also coming very, very clear. I'm being reminded of the time, but all in all, what I can say is that I have enjoyed the book. I do read biographies. I have enjoyed this one, and I feel it's a very good product. For those of you who haven't gone through it, I will actually advise you to take your time, go through it. It's not very difficult to read it. It's written in very simple English. It's straightforward, and it's actually accessible. You can actually understand. For those of you who may also have listened to stories from your parents, you would actually see yourself sitting around the fire and actually being told the story that is in this book. So I think that what I can only say to the authors, I'm delighted that you've put something like this. I urge you to move on. There's another one that you should also be writing, and please do that.